Hi, Kip Indie families. So if you are anything like me, you're probably thinking about how crazy the end of this year has been, how hard it is to celebrate all the accomplishments that our students have made. We can't all be together. So today I'm going to show you guys how you can make a graduation or promotion cap for your Kip Indie student to show them that you are proud of them and you want to celebrate that they are moving on to another grade level or just all their hard work and accomplishment from the year. So we're going to do this using things that we have in our homes because no one needs to go out to a craft store right now, right? I found in my home just a few things that I'm going to use, and I'm going to give you some alternatives for you to use in case you don't have these specific items. So the first one's pretty easy. I'm using a cereal box. Beginning of this quarantine, I was craving a little childhood deliciousness, so I got myself some Cocoa Pebbles. The box disappeared somehow, and now I'm going to use the casing here as a way to make a band for my graduation cap. If you don't have something like a cereal box, the nice thing about this is it's kind of stiff, but it's still thin. You can use something like a normal shipping box, an Amazon box, post box. You would just need to sort of cut it into flat pieces like this and roll it back and forth a few times so that it's a little bit easier to cut and manipulate. So what I would do if I had a thicker post office box is cut it flat like this and then just sort of on the floor, start at one end and roll it back and forth a few different times. I might even put my knees on it for a second and do that back and forth in both directions until it's a little easier to bend and move around. So you don't want it so stiff that it sort of creates a square. You want it to be fitting on the head. So now I'm going to show you the other things we're going to use to get this together. I have some yarn. If you have string or thread, anything around the house, that should work. You could even use a scrap of old fabric if you have it. That's going to be for sort of measuring before we put it on how far we want to cut, okay? Because we're cutting, we're going to need some scissors. And then tape and a stapler would be incredibly useful for this. If you just have stapler, that's fine. If you just have tape, that's fine. I do not recommend glue for this project because having it on the head where there's a lot of movement and hair gets in there, it can be really messy and most glues aren't going to be strong enough to hold that. So I recommend tape and a stapler. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take a big piece of this yarn and I'm going to sort of loosely fit it around the top of my head where I want the crown of my cap to fit. So don't want it too far up like this, where it might kind of come undone. I want to start it from the back of my head, bring it loosely around, sort of see, that's good. We don't need it too tight and you don't want it so loose that the cap will just slide right off. Leave my finger where it touched. I'm going to cut this right here. And I'm just going to use that scrap to sort of loosely measure how long I need this to be, okay? Now I'm going to pay attention to whatever board I have lying around. You could do this with paper if you have like printer paper, but the problem is the paper is going to be very flimsy and it might get destroyed more easily. We want to be able to add decorations to this. That's going to be a separate video. And it's a lot easier to decorate on something that's a little sturdier like cardboard. So I'm cutting off the edges of my box here because I'm always thinking about other projects. I'm actually going to leave these in case I want to use them for something else. And you want your cuts to be pretty straight, but it's okay if they're not perfect. Cut off this glue flap. Now this part's up to you. I'm actually going to cut these two pieces apart because I don't feel like a little rip here. It's going to look great aesthetically when I have it on my head. You might want to keep that, and that's absolutely fine. It just means you're going to have to, if you cut it like me, you're going to have to attach it in more than one place. Now, this is a little bit too big, too tall to put around my head, right? So I'm actually going to divide this in half. And there are two ways I could do that. I can measure precisely, or I can just fold it. And I'm going to eventually want this unpainted cardboard side facing out from my cap. The reason for that is if I decide to paint or use markers or anything else to decorate my cap, I'm gonna want to have something that's gonna hold the color. And this already has a bunch of ink on it, so it's not gonna hold the color very well. So I'm actually gonna fold inwards like this. And if you're having a hard time getting a nice, neat fold, go ahead and use your scissors or a pencil, anything you have around. Call that scoring the fold. It's just kind of like making it a little bit more precise. And then I can cut that in half. Now for your students, depending on the size of their head, this might actually be enough for them to get started. But I'm gonna take my little head measurement that I already made with my yarn and hold it up next to this and see if it's the right size for me. Now I need a whole other 2 inches down here, if you can see. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and do the other side of my cereal box as well. So this is gonna be the crown of our hat. That's the part that goes around the head. Then we're gonna make a topping, and it's just gonna be a very flat, simple paper topping that we'll add decorations to. I'm going to show you guys how we'll attach those today, but you don't need to attach it yet, especially if you have a student that's going to want to decorate a bunch on the outside, which we highly encourage. It's a little bit easier to decorate the top of the cap if it's not attached to the crown yet. Okay, so now I'm going to compare this to my cut. So I don't need all 4 of these. I'm just going to use 3. To make it a little bit stronger, I'm going to overlap them slightly, not very much, just about by ½ an inch. I'm going to go ahead and staple this. If you'd prefer to tape it, that is absolutely fine. The thing I like about the staples is it's a little bit easier to take it apart if I decide later that I want more or less. And if they don't line up perfectly, you can see here one is a little bit bigger than the other. That's very easy to go back and trim just to give it that nice finished look. And up my next one, staple. Now I use the string to sort of get an idea of how much cardboard I need. But when I measure it for my head, when I finally staple it on, the size of my head, I don't really need to use the string as much as I need an adult or someone, an older brother or sister to help me. So it's my very fashionable crown starting. So that right there is pretty good. I'm going to hold it with my finger, take it off, staple this together. The top and the bottom. Oh, didn't quite get that one. See, I stapled right here, down here, so that there are no extra flaps. And I'm just going to cut off the excess. And it is okay if this is not a perfect cut. If you want to go back and do one last staple here, just to make sure this flap stays flat, you can. Or what I'm going to do is I'm actually, since we're going to decorate this later, take a bit of my tape where that flap is. I'm just going to go ahead and tape it up. And that'll do a couple things. That's going to keep the staples from catching on any hair. It's also just going to make sure that it looks nice and flat and seamless for when we start to decorate. In the next video, I'll show you some different ideas for decorating. I know we don't all have like paints at home or markers necessarily. So I'm going to give us a few different options for how we can decorate this. So now I have graduation crown. And if you decide this is a little too tall for you, the nice thing is once you already have it stapled to the shape of your head, it is very easy to sort of fold it back down in half and cut off an extra inch. I'm actually going to keep it this tall because then when I add the top, they'll be very exaggerated, and I can adjust that later if I want. Now for the top, I'm just going to use plain paper. If you don't have paper around the house, you can use drawing paper, you could use printer paper, you could use something that you got in the mail that has something on the back, just turn it to the plain side. Doesn't matter because we're going to decorate it and cover it up. But it doesn't have to be as thick as the cardboard top. If you have extra cardboard, you want to use that, that's fine too. It'll give your hat a little bit more of a hold in its shape, but the paper should work just fine. And what I'm going to do is I want to turn this into one large square. Don't need it to be enormous. So I'm going to kind of measure out for my hat the right size. So I'm folding off the edge here just to see what it looks like. And if this square would be large enough. That square actually fits pretty well. So what I'm going to do is cut off the extra flap here. So now that I have my square, and I just took a regular piece of construction paper, folded it into a square by going corner to corner, and then I cut off the excess. Now this looks like about the right size to cover up my crown. So I would ask you to hold this aside for the next video when we learn how to decorate it before you attach it. But if you want to see just how it fits all together, use a tiny bit of tape. Put your crown on top of the circle. You can kind of line it up with your eyes to make sure it looks like it's about even. Doesn't have to be perfect. And just use 2 small pieces of tape from the inside. You can see I started it right here, rolled it down, and now I'm going to put it down on the paper. So it's at a 90-degree angle on the inside. Turn it around to the other side. I'm going to do the exact same thing. Put it down here, 90-degree angle, smooth it out. And this will be good just for sort of fitting it. Now it's completely plain right now. It's not going to look great. You haven't decorated yet. But this will be my little graduation cap. And you can see, since I haven't completely taped it up inside, that if I pull it down too much, you can see all the way through. But this is just for sort of sizing and thinking, okay, is that the right size square for me? Do I want it bigger? Not quite even. In our next video, we're going to go over how to decorate this. On the top, you could put your scholar's name, you could draw their favorite memory, you could add a whole bunch of stuff depending on what we have at home. We're going to go over those supplies later. But this is just for fitting. So we have a cardboard topper, sorry, a cardboard crown and a paper topper. And you can take that apart, and then this is ready for decoration, and this is ready for decoration. And we'll reunite them when they've been decorated to celebrate our scholars. If you have any questions, feel free to call or text me on my work phone. It's 317-771-0167. And you can also get my Zoom on Google Classroom if you want to reach out. I have office hours twice a week. And if your scholar is not using Google Classroom, if you're K1 or 2, feel free to reach out to me via email, astoughton@kipindy.org. Thanks so much for joining, and I'm really excited that we get to do something to show all our scholars how proud we are of them, how much we love them, and how much hard work they've put in this very bizarre year.